Welcome to the France 24 debate, the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. And it's a race that everybody's watching very closely. It's got the urgency of a sprint, but of course the needs of meticulous planning, such as for a marathon. Then, of course, there are hurdles to cross, so perhaps it resembles more a sort of Olympic steeplechase scenario. The race began in January with the identification of the SARS-CoV-2 genome. By March, the first vaccine safety trials on humans began. And the pandemic took a tighter and tighter grip across the world. 10 vaccines are now in the final phase of testing. Our guests to discuss the vaccine race on set here in France 24. Pauline Londex is co-founder of the OTM, which is the Observatoire de la Transparence dans les Politiques du Médicament. It's about transparency in medicines and vaccines. And thank you, Pauline, for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
On the other side of the studio, though not necessarily against, because it's not that kind of show, but there will be fierce debate, I know. Jean-Michel Molina, who's head of infectious diseases at the Hôpital Saint-Louis here in Paris, and also the Hôpital Lariboisière.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir, for being with us here in the studio. We are joined by two guests who join us from afar, and very welcome they are on this program too. First, in California, Andrew Neumer, who's Associate Professor of Public Health. Andrew, good evening to you, and thank you for being on the debate here on France 24. We appreciate your time, sir. And joining us...
My pleasure to join you.
Excellent, sir. And joining us from Lancaster in the United Kingdom, Dr. Mohammed Munir, a virologist and lecturer in biomedicines at the University of Lancaster, up there in the northwest of England, a place I know extremely well because it's where I hail from. Mohammed, thank you very much for being with us. Great to see you. Let's kick this one off by beginning in the studio with our guests, Pauline and Jean-Michel. Pauline, I'll give you the first go. There are 10 vaccines in the final phase of testing. Everyone is hoping somehow, quickly, a vaccine emerges. What are you worried about? What are you concerned about?
I think what we have to understand is that to develop a vaccine is a big effort. It's an effort that usually takes about between 5 to 10 years, if we take the example of the flu vaccine. So here we have the challenge, the international community have the challenge to have to develop a vaccine in a very short time, much shorter than usually. So there is this challenge, and we can worry that the developers of the different vaccines, in particular the one that you mentioned that are close to the market approval, maybe who are in phase 3, there are 8 developers that are in phase 3 now. We can worry that they are all targeting the same protein of the virus, so they, for good reasons, but what we can worry about is that maybe the efforts are not coordinated enough between the different actors. They could have been maybe more coordinated.
Pauline, thank you very much indeed. Jean-Michel, in terms of where you're working on the sharp end of things, you're seeing patients, you've seen this grow exponentially in a very scary way. You're both here with masks on, and that is extremely wise because that's what people should be doing. I'm taking it with my management as to why I'm not wearing a mask, perhaps. Maybe I should. In terms of what's happening with the vaccine, though, the people that you work with, who you work with every day, you must be sort of crying out for this to happen. Do you think it can happen quickly? Would you call for kind of corners to be cut to allow this to happen?
Well, clearly we are really eagerly awaiting a vaccine, and we think that's going to be a very potent tool to, curb the epidemic. It's probably not, the magic bullet, but again, it's going to be very useful. So, we hope that by the end of the year, early next year, there's going to be a vaccine. Clearly, we need to be transparent about the efficacy of this vaccine and, more importantly, its safety. And that's what people are concerned about, what could be the side effects of the vaccine. So if we want people to be vaccinated, and that's very critical for the success of the vaccine, that there is a high uptake of the vaccine. And for that, we need to convince the public that the vaccine is very effective, but also very safe. And that's going to be one of the challenges. It's not enough to develop the vaccine. It's as important that the vaccine is going to be used and that we could, eventually have what we call this herd immunity that will help to stop the epidemic.
Herd immunity, it's one of those expressions that gets people sort of like quite irate in terms of, because one understands by that it's allowing the whole herd to catch the disease in order to create the antibodies to prevent the illness.
Yes, maybe not the whole herd, but at least 60% of the population, so that the virus doesn't have any more targets in the population, and therefore the transmission is halted. And that's what we are looking for.
Okay.
Again, we shouldn't think that the vaccine alone is going to be enough. Again, we need to combine the tools we have to stop the epidemic. And, we need to use the vaccine when it's available. And we need to use also all the other measures that are used today to, in some ways, reduce the rate of transmission.
Okay, I want to thank you and I want to thank Pauline. And as you've both been talking with your masks on, I'm realizing that what they're doing is actually protecting me as much as protecting themselves. And given that at France 24, whenever we walk around the building, wherever we're sat at our desk working, we need to wear masks. Suddenly we go on air, we don't wear masks. It's a strange thing, and maybe we need to reassess what we're doing. I might ask your advice on that in a moment. I don't know, but thank you both for coming in, and thank you both for wearing your masks. I'm very touched by that. Let's bring in our guests from afar, who are in their own space, so they can be unmasked, no problems whatsoever. I'll start with California, with Andrew Neumann, the Associate Professor of Public Health there. Andrew, good evening to you. We've heard here about the misgivings, the fears, the hopes for a vaccine. I know where you are in the States with the high levels of infection and, of course, the high levels of death. It is urgent to get something happening quickly. Do you feel a pressure? Do you feel there's a pressure to do that, a pressure to cut corners?
I don't feel there's a pressure to cut corners. I have great faith in the process, and the trials are being run, with greater transparency than I think ever before. So I have great faith in getting a fair result from the vaccine process. Of course, we don't know what that result will be, and we all have to be patient until the trials conclude. But I'd like to touch on something that one of your other guests said about the safety of the vaccine. We're also concerned with the efficacy, because the FDA here in the United States has said that they will approve vaccines with 50% or better efficacy. And we have to anticipate that some people who are vaccinated will still get the disease if the vaccine is indeed only 50% effective. So, that has potential to cause enormous problems later on, as people say, well, you promised me a vaccine and I took it and I still got the disease. So we're going to have to plan very carefully to roll out this vaccine and educate the public about what it really means.
In terms of what that means, then, there's the safety aspect, there's the efficiency aspect. This is a real public health message that needs to be put across, then.
I mean, one of your other guests said it's not a magic bullet, or perhaps it was you. And I mean, if the vaccine efficacy is 50 or 60%, then that's correct. It won't be a magic bullet. I mean, the measles vaccine is effective greater than 90% of the time. But so people have to understand that it's a risk reducer, but not a risk eliminator. But it is going to be the best tool we have in the fight against COVID-19.
Okay, and that race continues. Andrew, thank you very much for the moment. Let's show people a little graphic, as we call it, to sort of illustrate the number of vaccines that are currently in the process of being developed. There's an impressive number of those. I believe at some point we can show you that we've got the numbers to put up on the wall and let you take a look and consider. 10 vaccines now in the phase of testing, but so many others. This tracker here from the New York Times, which is very useful, and we'll give New York Times a plug on that one. You can see there the whole breakdown of what is on the way. 5 have been approved for limited use, as you can see in the end of that number sequence there. And this is one of the questions about sort of whether those things should be used or not, how they should be used and who they are used on. And when you look at how certain vaccines are being tested on in other countries, I'm looking here at a list of vaccines, most of all being developed from China, being put into use in other countries. and you think, well, this is actually human experimentation, which seems a little bit sinister. Let's bring in Mohammed Munir from Lancaster University. Now, Mohammed and I have spoken many times, I hope you know I'm using your first name, sir, like that, about this story. And Mohammed Munir was the first person to say to me, and it was back in February, that this situation could become a pandemic. Sir, you were proven right. And we sit here now, and I know there's no great satisfaction for you in hearing that because you're thinking of all the suffering that people have had. How do you feel about the possibility of a vaccine? Are you feeling optimistic at this stage?
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for putting me back on February. I'm really pleased that that came out as if people remember that. But of course, there's a lot of suffering for people. I really feel sorry for that. But coming back onto the point of the vaccine, I think there is a great level of optimism, not just because we are progressing very well with the vaccines, but also the scale of the vaccine trials, those are ongoing. There is a higher resolution of the data that would become available. I know that two of the vaccines have a few glitches, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, but even if we exclude those are primarily based on the same technology, but we can consider other vaccines. Still, there is a great level of optimism. And my anticipation is that by the end of this year, we will have data enough from one or another vaccine to be presented to the regulatory bodies. And today, just a while before, Moderna has announced that they have got approval from the European Medicine Agency to look onto the data and see whether that can be approved or not. I think this is a great achievement in such a short time. So my anticipation is still that in the first quarter of 2021, we will have a vaccine, and then it would be the question about the distribution and deployment in the field.
So first quarter of 2021, Dr. Munir, you think we could have a vaccine that is viable, that could work?
So that is true, and that is primarily based on to the assessment of the vaccine. For example, FDA, as had been quoted before, has, of course, announced 50% efficacy would be good enough to be approved, but at the condition that the trial will not be terminated until next 2 months. So even if the vaccine would be approved, they would still be looking onto the data retrospectively to really ensure that it is effective and it is hitting all those marks that are required for a good vaccine to be approved.
Dr. Munir, for now, thank you very much indeed. What I'm thinking as a complete layman, as someone who basically is discovering as we go and learning things here in this discussion, is that when we hear, say, for instance, Vladimir Putin saying that he's got a vaccine and his daughter's taken that vaccine and everything's great, and they call it Sputnik, and they're saying basically we're going to sort of cure the world. Why isn't there celebration? What are the concerns you have? What are the worries? Pauline, can I ask you?
I think what can be worrying in this is so the lack of coordination. I think under this research for this vaccine, we can see that there is some political interest as well from different leaders. Trump in the US would like a vaccine on the market before the presidential election. In Russia, as you mentioned, there is this Sputnik 5 vaccine in development, and China also is candidate. We can see that there are other things at stake that are not only public health, that are also political and geostrategical interests. So I think it might be something that's a problem because it can interfere with proper research and development and collaboration between the different stakeholders in the different countries. And unfortunately, it could be counter-efficient.
So this question of politics, perhaps, interfering with the pure medicine or the pure research, the pure sort of experimentation, the empirical science that needs to go into this kind of thing. That's what you're worried about, the fact that politicians might get in the way in some way.
What we have to consider is that billions of dollars have been invested to these vaccines, this development, and we need these vaccines. So we understand these efforts and we understand that this money is spent for that. But the problem is that these different actions are not coordinated enough. And since the beginning of this debate, we have heard about the vaccine. But I think we have to talk about the vaccines because the efficiency of a vaccine is not binary. It's not, is it working, yes or no? It might be more efficient to reduce the transmission for some people, or it might be other vaccine might be more efficient to reduce the the severity of the disease for people who are infected. So I think we have to consider vaccines as different tools. Maybe we need several vaccines for different populations. And that's why we really need this collaboration, this transparency and collaborations between the different governments to develop various several tools that can work in complementary.
You're speaking very intelligently about this. And when you say something like not one vaccine, but several vaccines and whether it will work or not, as someone who doesn't understand these things, as a kind of ordinary person, I'm thinking, well, a vaccine's a vaccine. If you take the vaccine, that is something that's going to cure you. Now, you were saying earlier that there's a possibility, Jean-Michel, you were saying earlier that it may not be a vaccine that's more than 50% effective. And this is clearly something that is going to be a massive problem going forward.
Well, any level of efficacy is going to be useful.
Okay.
Of course.
I accept that completely.
And again, in order to prevent infection, we have vaccines, we have other tools that are being developed. We have drugs that could be used for prophylaxis, monoclonal antibodies as well, antivirals. So, again, as I said, you probably need to rely on a combination of different tools. Obviously, a vaccine would be great to have a very effective vaccine. We need to ensure that the safety of the vaccine is high enough for people to accept to be vaccinated. We need also to ensure that the supply is high enough. And probably we have some time before the vaccine are going to be on the market. So during that time, we need, as you said, to coordinate our efforts and to be prepared for implementation of a vaccine policy, prioritizing high-risk groups, public health professionals potentially, other very sensitive groups of people. And we need to probably make the plan for a safety, a real-time safety program, so that a trial is of interest for providing data on safety and efficacy, but then you have the real life efficacy when you use the vaccine in billions of people, and you need to make sure that very rare side effects that have not been reported during trials could be actually identified in real life experience.
You're making this even more scary for me. Jean-Michel, thank you very much indeed. We're taking a very short break. Part 2 coming up very, very shortly after that, when we're discussing more about the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. We'll mention anti-vaxxers, Donald Trump, all kinds of elements will come to this discussion. Stay with us. Part 2 of the France 24 debate. Welcome back. We're discussing the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. It is a very closely observed race too. And our guests discussing this this evening, we have Pauline Londex, who's co-founder of the OTM, which is the Observatoire de Transparence dans les Politiques du Médicament, which is about medical transparency. Thank you, Pauline, for joining us. On the other side of the studio from Pauline is Jean-Michel Molina, Head of Infectious Diseases at the Hôpital Saint-Louis and the Hôpital La Riboisière here in Paris. Thank you for being with us. Joining us from afar, from California, Andrew Neumer, Associate Professor of Public Health. Andrew, thanks for being with us here. And by Skype from the northwest of England, Dr. Mohammed Munir from Lancaster University. Mohammed, thanks for being with us. I'll start with you, Sir Mohammed, because we've got the image on you. The link is working. In terms of what's happening, Mohammed, I mean, you were saying earlier, you're hopeful there'll be a vaccine by early 2021. When one reads, as an ordinary person, that China has 3 vaccines or 4 vaccines which are being used, and one of them's in Wuhan, where the whole thing kicked off, round about a year ago, isn't it, I think? When ordinary people read that, can you understand that they start to feel a bit frustrated?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they start feeling that, okay, yeah, it's been a long time and we haven't reached to that point. But when we talk really about the vaccines, that is not really a matter of days or months or so. It's all about the efficacy and the data availability that is reliable enough to really take those products forward. Because as we are seeing, I mean, with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and for the AstraZeneca vaccine, there are always some side effects associated with any of the vaccine, any of the product that you use. For example, Lilly antibodies that also have some health concerns. So I think that the real question is that until we have a satisfaction for a vaccine, regardless of its efficacy, I would say, but until it is not safe, there would be no meaning to have it rolled out to the population. And certainly that is frustrating for the time it is taking, but that is essential benchmark that we need to look into.
I hear completely what you're saying, and you always convince me with the explanations completely, Dr. Munir. I'm looking at one approved for use phase 3 vaccine from CanSino Biologics from China, and they're testing it in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Russia. Is this normal practice to be testing things in third-party countries in this way?
Yeah, I think the late stage phase 3 trial is the one that you inoculate into the population and let them go into the normal life, and then you compare how they get on with the infection. If they get the infection, whether they're going to develop disease in the presence of a vaccine or not. But in China, soon after the lockdown in Wuhan, and then the disease was completely removed. I mean, only until last week when we are seeing that the Qingdao has around 12 different clusters. There hasn't been any major outbreak in China. So therefore, the need for them is to really go on to other countries where the infection is higher, where they can demonstrate the efficacy of the vaccine. That's how they went on to the different countries. Not only in these 3 countries, but now they are in Egypt, in Brazil, and many other countries, which is really the process to expedite for the efficacy evaluation. And that is how it is working. But here in the Europe or in the America, all those vaccines, they are pretty good on their own because the infection is pretty high, and particularly now with the second wave, so they are good on their own.
Dr. Munir, thank you very much indeed for now. You mentioned Brazil, and obviously I think 4 vaccines currently undergoing final tests in Brazil. The Brazilians very keen to say that they've got a solution, and Jair Bolsonaro, the president, is always keen to plug with national pride what's happening in his country. And of course, the statistics on coronavirus there are very scary indeed right now. Let's go back to California to Andrew Neuber, the Associate Professor of Public Health there. Andrew, can I just ask a question regarding Donald Trump? And, you know, you're not here to speak for or against Donald Trump, I know, but there may be people watching who've seen Trump say that he's immune to COVID-19, because that's what he has been saying. He has had an experimental treatment. That treatment is not a vaccine. It's something to kind of like palliate or get rid of his symptoms, isn't it?
Yeah, he received several treatments, one of which was remdesivir, which blocks viral replication, and another of which is an antibody cocktail, which, as you say, it palliates the disease. It's an artificial, version of our own immunity, except it doesn't act like a vaccine with permanent, protection. So it's impossible to know the immune status of our president at this stage. I mean, most people who survive infection have at least short-term immunity, and he would be no different. But there's been a lot of criminology on, trying to decipher the president's, health status, and I really don't have any deep insight into that.
No, I was concerned about what he'd been taking and whether people might be confused, because, I mean, I'm just, again, speaking as a layman. I'm not a specialist, but I have an inquiring mind, and I'm wondering what he's taken, and is it something that's going to provide him with any kind of lasting protection?
Well, no, that I can answer more clearly. The remdesivir is not going to confer him immunity. It's a treatment, and the antibody cocktail he received does not give long-term immunity. So there's no drug or treatment available to anybody, any of your viewers, or to the President of the United States today, that confers long-term immunity. For that, we all have to wait for the vaccine, including world leaders.
That is as it should be as well, regardless of the fact he said the best possible treatment that you can get in the United States, and good on the doctors for doing that for him. Andrew, another question to you, if you don't mind. In terms of the state of play for a vaccine where you are, what is the feeling there in terms of when it might happen, what the timescale might be? I'm not asking from the political Trump perspective or whoever's trying to profit from it perspective, but from your perspective as someone who's concerned with public health and caring for people.
Yeah, I think early 2021 is sort of the best case scenario, assuming that the unblinded vaccine trials produce numbers that are, good. I mean, the FDA has said 50% is their bar for effectiveness. So I do disagree somewhat with Jean-Michel about any protection is better than nothing, because if it's below 50%, the FDA has said that they won't approve it. But I am optimistic that in the first quarter of 2021, the vaccine may be available as early as then. Of course, they're going to have to make millions of doses, hundreds of millions of doses. I mean, before everything is over, billions of doses. And so that's going to become also a logistical issue. But so as one of your other guests said, the first people to get the vaccine will be medical staff, clinical people, and then there'll be, a priority scheme. I mean, they cannot vaccinate the whole planet in 4 weeks. It's impossible.
Indeed, the logistics even speak to me as a layman to say that it isn't possible to get around everybody with the prerequisite number of syringes, drugs, whatever, and do the business that needs to be done. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Stay with us. We'll get back to you very, very shortly. Back to the studio with Pauline and Jean-Michel here to talk more about this race for the vaccine. I've got a bit of a cheat sheet that I put together myself, my own research, of course, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 phase 3 approved for limited use vaccines. 3 are Chinese of origin. 1 is Russian. We were speaking about the Russian one that Vladimir Putin has said that his daughter has had. How would you feel about having one of these as a vaccine? Pauline, is something that you personally would think, yeah, okay, as part of what needs to happen, I'd be willing to take this? Or is what we're seeing here from these 3 Chinese sources and the Russian source dangerous?
I think when we see the candidates and if they go through the different authorities and regulatories, they have to fulfill some regulatory compliance. They have to be compliant to that. So if they go through that at the European level, then we can trust it as much as we trust other vaccines from other countries, I believe. The question is, would they go through the different regulatory process?
That's it. So it's a question of that process. That's the thing, isn't it? Because obviously, are the standards different?
Standards are different indeed between the different regulatory authorities, and they have to follow their own process in the different countries.
Pauline, thank you. Jean-Michel, would you trust the Chinese vaccine? Would you trust the Russian vaccine?
Well, again, it's not about the Chinese or the Russian. It's about the data that we can, get.
So I wasn't implying that it was a nationalistic thing. I was
Sure.
just implying whether they have the same standards.
No, well, again, once we have access to the data in terms of safety, efficacy, and the agencies know how to approve the vaccine. So there are requirements, like Pauline said, and they have to go through these requirements and to make people aware of the issues they have to deal with. Can they provide enough vaccines the way they are manufacturing the vaccine? And again, we don't know enough at this point. It's not enough to have Putin's daughter getting the vaccine and be well to get the vaccine to everyone. So clearly we need more data, and it's not going to be the first vaccine to be marketed. There are people who have a lot of expertise in the different agencies to tell us whether or not the vaccine is good enough to be rolled out. And again, what's important also for the people watching this debate today is that the vaccine is not the organism itself. It's not a viable organism. It's either a dead organism or part of the organism. So when we vaccinate people, we don't give them the virus. That's important for them to know. we're not injecting the disease. We are trying to reproduce the natural immunity.
That's to reassure people that they won't have this COVID-19 injected into them.
That's right. The vaccine is not about that. It's trying to reproduce natural immunity to the virus.
Okay. I was going to ask you how is that done, but I think we need to have another hour of programming for you to explain that to us, and I'm sure that you can. So we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our guests here in the studio. They are Pauline Landex from the OTM, the Observatoire de la Transparence dans les politiques de médicaments, Medical Transparency Pressure Group. Thanks to Jean-Michel Molina from the Hôpital Lariboisière and Hôpital Saint-Louis, where you're head of infectious diseases. And thanks to our guests who joined us by Skype. Andrew Neumer from California, the Associate Professor of Public Health there, and by Skype from Lancaster in the northwest of England, Dr. Mohammed Munir, virologist and lecturer in micromedicine. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for watching the France 24 debate. Stay with us.